All right, welcome to another 902 gaming video, and today I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to go over Reid Duke's video about standard power rankings and kind of see where we're at with standard. I think I know where the format's at right now, but always better to get somebody's opinion that's a whole lot better than you are at Magic, especially at standard. I think Reid Duke's probably one of the best players in Magic still. Okay, so let's get to the video. Hopefully volume, everything's working good.
So we're starting to get a clear picture of what
hopefully it's not too loud.
The metagame is looking like. Let's dive in. Coming in at number 10, we have Rakdos or Mardu Sacrifice. The key cards here are always going to be Shambling Ghast and Deadly Dispute. From there, there's a lot of customizability. Of course, a couple of...
I think any black white or Mardu, like he's talking about, all exist because these two cards exist. I don't think Shambling Ghast is necessary, but basically I would classify them as Deadly Dispute decks.
Of really appealing cards from the new set are Oni, Cult, Anvil, and Experimental Synthesizer. So you could go in that direction with Artifact Sacrifice, sometimes tapping into the blood token synergies. But as mentioned, there's a huge range of ways you can build this, all the way from aggressive low curve decks that are targeting your opponent's life total, all the way to more controlling decks like Blood on the Snow, black based control deck, just tapping into red for a select few cards.
Yeah, I agree with him there. I don't know if it's number 10. I think in terms of standard power rankings, yes. If I had an option, I would probably put this at the bottom. I don't think it does enough powerful things anymore in the format. I think it was the top tier deck, or one of the top tier decks in the previous standard format before Neon Dynasty came out. I think black white right now is at the bottom. I think if you're not playing Blood in the Snow and Planeswalkers, I think you're likely doing it wrong. I haven't played the artifact version yet. It is coming up in another video soon, just to sort of see how it plays out. But I definitely agree with him here. This is definitely a contender, but not the best contender. I think if you're not going bigger than your opponent, you're in trouble.
At number 9, we have Gruel, sometimes Naya, but the main decks that I'm talking about here are either Werewolf Tribal or just a non-tribal Gruel beatdown deck.
Yep.
In both cases, you have a deck that was...
You have like Uvenwald, Oddity, the 4-mana haste. Then you can have like decks with Frog King Mythic all the way up to 5 mana. Or like he says, you can have the red-green Werewolf deck. I still think mono green is likely where you want to be at, but he might talk about this after. So, or red green Snow for sure.
A pretty big winner from the banning of Faceless Haven, Alrund's Epiphany, Divide by Zero, and a deck that even picked up some new tools with Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. In any case, these decks play the hardest hitting threats possible. If your opponent ever misses a beat, they're pretty much just dead. They're not going to be able to survive your early rush, and that's especially true if you're playing werewolves and your opponent misses a play on an early turn. The game's basically over on the spot. At number 8, we have blue-white
or land drop.
Azorius Control. White, I think, became an especially good pairing for blue control decks because of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty really rounding out the removal suite. Very excited about Iganjo, Seat of the Empire. That's like the perfect deck perfect card for an Azorius Control deck, in that it can either be untapped reliable mana, or it can be a removal spell for a creature that's attacking you or one of your planeswalkers. Insurance against haste creatures, clean up the mess after you've wiped the board with a Doomscar or a Farewell.
I think these cards are great, and especially in control type decks that have access to a lot of mana. For the most part, though, in aggro decks, unless you're playing a bunch of legendary creatures or something in it, 3 mana is a lot for 4 damage, because that's typically a 2 mana spell and sometimes a 1 mana spell. So 3 mana is a lot. And if you want to look at it in discarding a land, it's kind of 4 mana. So you got to kind of adjust for that as well. Majority of time, I think I've said this in a previous video, majority of time these lands are going to just be untapped legendary lands.
But we also have...
And I think that's okay.
March of Otherworldly Light as
yeah,
a new addition from Neon Dynasty,
yep.
and a huge one is the Wandering Emperor.
Yep.
So this is a
huge
using a lot of these new white removal spells and curving all the way up to Hullbreaker Horror, which is sort of the apex predator of Standard right now. Number 7, we have Mono Green. Not going to be a huge surprise here. This deck has existed in...
I might put this higher than number 7. I might put this in the top 3, I think. But let's see where he goes from here.
A pretty similar form for actually a couple full iterations of Standard, but it remains extremely powerful. Werewolf Pack Leader, Old Growth Troll, Blizzard Brawl. These are just some of the most efficient and punishing cards you can have.
I think Blizzard Brawl is still one of the best cards in Standard, and I don't think people are trying to maximize it as well as they should or as best as they can.
Especially that Blizzard Brawl being a 1-mana removal spell that lets you attack with impunity into opposing blockers and kill your opponent's best threat on a turn that you're usually double
for 1 mana.
A huge tempo swing.
Yeah.
Coming in at number 6, we have Blue-White or Esper Midrange. So another archetype with sort of blurry lines where there's a lot of customizability in what you're doing, but generally these decks are going to want to play utility creatures.
What does it say? Alchemy's power ranking.
Cards with Flash, Skyclave Apparition, Brutal Cathar, stuff like that. And disruptive elements, counter spells, keep your opponents on their toes and navigate the game.
I think there is something here as well in what he's talking about in terms of like Skyclave and Brutal Cathar, and then maybe backed up by some Planeswalkers, and you're basically just dealing with your opponent's threats while playing large threats yourself.
Into a race situation or otherwise some kind of scenario that your deck is better suited to winning than your opponent. Now, as we get into the top 5 decks, this is what I consider to be really the top tier of Standard right now. Browsing through events, these are the decks that just consistently showed up in top 8s, the decks that are winning events, the decks that you really want to be prepared for and have a clear game plan against if you're going to be playing Standard coming up. So number 5, we have Mono White. So again, mostly a familiar archetype, but picked up a lot of new weapons with Neon Dynasty. And
I think Mono White has the most customizability of any deck right now. I think I said it during my Kamigawa preview spoilers, where it got a lot of tools to handle a lot of different decks, and I think the deck, if built correctly, can handle the metagame better than any other deck.
And just one of the fastest, most punishing decks. Hopeful Initiate's really good right now. Wandering Emperor is really good right now. Thalia and Elite Spellbinder remain excellent ways to build disruption into the structure of your main deck. So you can do a lot worse than choosing Mono White. Number 4, we have Orzof Control. This is what I like to call the king of the fair matchups. If you're just playing, bread and butter magic, trading resources, playing creatures to attack and block, Orzof is kind of the best you can be doing. The value generation, the quality of the removal.
I'm not sure what's different from Orzof here versus Orzof at number 10. I think they both play Deadly Dispute, and they both play Shambling Gas. Some of them don't play Shambling Gas, and I guess some of them don't play Deadly Dispute. They might play the one that exiles 2 permanents with flashback. What are we called here? Yeah. Let's see quickly. Rite of Oblivion. So with Rite of Oblivion, I think this is what he's talking about more so than anything else, and maybe more Vanishing Verses and stuff. I still don't see a difference between this and the other black-white deck or Mardu deck that he was talking about. I suppose it's maybe if you're talking more artifact-oriented or just like sacrifice, I guess. But I think they're very similar. They're going to play very similar cards. And he may be talking more about the stuff with like the learn mechanic and that.
Vanishing Verse and Rite of Oblivion.
Yep.
Just so high.
Oh, there we go.
And Orzof,
figured it out.
Again, another archetype where you can customize it. You have really, really good sideboard options to tailor for whatever matchup you need to beat. And I expect Orzof to continue putting up good results in Standard. At number 3, we have 2 different versions of Jeskai, but both are really combo
Yeah, I'm sure Hinata and Magma Opus are here. I don't know what the other Jeskai version or the other Jeskai deck would be.
Esque decks, or at least blur the lines between control, mid-range, and combo. So the first one is Jeskai Hinata. Hinata Dawn Crowned allows you to cast spells cheaper for the number of targets they have.
Yeah.
So if you just look at Standard's list of most powerful spells, including the ones that do have multiple targets, you come up with Magma Opus. This one is just crazy because if you can find 6 distinct targets for Magma Opus's ability to cost 2 mana and will almost always result in a game win.
Yeah.
Other options
most of the time.
Command, March of Swirling Mists. A lot of these cards happen to pair well with Goldspan.
March of Swirling Mists and Hinata actually is pretty insane because it's basically 1 blue and it can phase out any number of your opponent's creatures if you have a Hinata out. So that's kind of insane.
Dragon 2, giving you that influx of mana. So a really nice package there in Jeskai Hinata. The other deck is what I'm calling Jeskai Treasures. So reminiscent of the old...
Oh, okay. So basically Alrund's Epiphany decks without Alrund's Epiphany and maybe dragons and Lear to generate a bunch of value and basically Goldspan Dragon into unexpected something. And you basically just make a whole bunch of treasures and then you can react to your opponent trying to do something while you cast multiple huge spells. I don't think I have a deck list here with this stuff. Oh, Unexpected Windfall, that's what it's called.
Jeskai Mutate deck. This uses Seize the Spoils, Unexpected Windfall, Goldspan Dragon to generate just unfair amounts of mana. And eventually you get to the point where you have...
I don't think this one does as much as the Hinata, and I think there's likely a combination of this deck and the Hinata deck that's probably the best version.
Lear, Disciple of the Drowned. So each one of these spells that generates treasures or targets...
I think Lear and Hinata is a good combination as well.
...targets your Goldspan Dragon.
Because you have 4 mana into 5 mana, so it's pretty good. And then you can actually cast the Magma Opus from your graveyard.
Gives you multiple casts, digs you deeper into your library, and eventually you can win the game with Alchemists.
And you have Galvanic Iteration and Alchemist Gambit and stuff like that. So
Gambit to take another turn.
Okay.
Or a white card whose name is escaping me that effectively storms for the number of spells that you've cast this turn and puts +1/+1 counters on your creatures. All right, the number 2 deck for this installment.
Storms. What card is he talking about? Unsure what Mr. Reid Duke is talking about here. I don't know if he's talking about Invoke Justice. I don't think so. Storms. Maybe Michiko's Reign of Truth, where it gets +1/+1 for each artifact and creature. Is that what he said?
Cast this turn and puts +1/+1 counters on your creatures. Storms for the number of card whose name is escape. A white card whose name is escaping me that effectively storms for the number of spells that you've cast this turn and puts +1/+1 counters on your creatures. All right.
Ooh, what card is he talking about? Storms. So, yeah, it gets +1/+1, but I don't think I've seen anything like that. Okay, we'll have to look it up afterwards.
Number 2 deck for this installment is It Dragons? A lot of similarities there between the number 3 Jeskai Hinata.
I think all of these are basically one archetype, but that's okay.
And number 2 Is It Dragons? In both cases, you've got Expressive Iteration, you've got Goldspan Dragon.
I think the expressive iteration decks is what you could call it. As much as you call Deadly Dispute decks, they're all kind of the same.
Efficient options regarding burn, counterspells, and card drawing, but Is It Dragons just more like simple, no frills approach where you are playing Goldspan Dragon, which remains one of the best threats in the format, alongside all of these efficient support cards.
Yep.
And the number 1 deck of this installment of the video power rankings, it is...
Thanks to Reid Duke, I think this is the reason why this deck is number 1, but we'll see.
Naya Runes, very, very exciting new archetype from
Kamigawa
Neon Dynasty.
Not exciting at all. This deck is a nightmare to play against, and it could very well spell the end of Standard, especially if they decide not to do anything about it and then adjust it somehow in Alchemy, and then pushes the players towards Alchemy. This deck is beyond busted in any way, shape, and form. It reminds me of the old Affinity decks where they can just keep playing, and all their spells have perfect synergy with each other. It's bananas.
So the key cards here are going to be Jukai Naturalist,
Mm-hmm.
Runeforge Champion, and Showdown of the Scalds.
Yep.
Between Naturalist,
I would say Showdown of the Scalds is probably the best card in the deck.
And Runeforge Champion, you have 2 different ways to reduce the cost of your auras, your runes, and if you have both on the battlefield, they're actually free to cast. So the idea is you have these explode.
Same as if you're able to find a deck that had Hinata and Runeforge Champion, it reduces the runes to 0 as well.
Explosive turns where you chain together 3, 4, 5, even more spells in one turn. And you can capitalize on that by either using it on a turn where you have Chapter 2 or Chapter 3 of Showdown of the Scalds, or where you have Generous Visitor on the battlefield, Kami of Transience, Michiko's Reign of Truth. But anyway, this Naya Runes deck really checks all the boxes in terms of being fast.
I think this deck hasn't even reached its final form either. I think there's a better version of this deck somewhere.
Having tons of card advantage and having this combo-esque element where even if your opponent, wipes your board.
I have had situations much like what he says here where my opponents had 3 creatures out and they were massive, and I've cast Doomscar or Farewell and exiled basically everything they had, and then the next turn they just went off again and were able to kill me with the rune of speed. I forget what it's called. They basically just cast it for 2 mana, boom, bang, and it was just game over. So this deck is going to be a huge, huge, huge problem. Rune of Speed. Oh, that's okay. Simple. Rune of Speed. They were just able to basically just drop a bunch of creatures again the next turn, throw a bunch of their runes onto lands, which I think is a little bit of the problem of the deck. And then basically just draw more, a couple more threats, play another Visitor, a Naturalist, and a Kami. Which they would have gotten back, and then, or just drew another one and then just happened to drop the exact same thing and had to face the exact same board again, or they just outright kill me in the case of when I cast Doomscar, just by putting a Rune of Speed out and being able to attack that way, just outright slaughtered me. And that should never be a situation where control decks are at, where you can wrath an opponent's board and they can quickly rebuild and then kill you the next turn. That's just absurd as far as I'm concerned.
With Doomscar or Farewell, if you have a robust starting position, you can actually just produce like a 10-10 haste trample creature pretty easily and kill your opponent out of nowhere. So that's it for today's video.
It's super important that you deal with the incidental damage, much like against the black-white decks, which kind of chip at you for 1/1/1, and then you hope to get like the Eye Twitch or the Shamelagast. You're better off just killing them. Even though they might get a little bit of treasure, you're better off killing them versus them casting Deadly Dispute on them. And I think much like the early creatures in Naya, you're better off killing them rather than trying to get them in a sweeper or something. You'll take far too much damage, and then you put yourself in a precarious position where you might be at, maybe think you're stabilized at 8 or 9, 10 life, and then your opponent, just like Reid said here, you just produce a 10-10 and you're dead the next turn with haste. So I don't know. Like, I think this deck could also potentially have the Storm Chaser in it, and just to give it a normal 3 mana haste threat, and you're basically just dead.
Video power rankings. Let me know if you think there's a sleeper deck in Standard that's going to put up results and that I should consider for the next installment. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, well, I think he's right. I think there's only about 6 cards. I think there's only about 6 decks, and you can argue what version of Jeskai is best. I think they're all about the same. They all play like expressive iteration and stuff like that. Those are likely all the best versions. I don't think it really makes much of a difference what you play. It's basically what you play as your finisher, and likely the best finisher in the format would be playing something like the dragon or Hinata or something like that, and or even Hullbreaker or some combination of all three. Same with the black-white decks. I think they're all the same as well. Maybe this artifact deck might have some legs to it as well. I haven't tried it out, but it plays along the same lines as all the other decks, like all the black-white control, black-white mid-range. It's all very, very similar in terms of what they play, and they play basically they're surrounded around Deadly Dispute, and much like blue-red or Jeskai is around expressive iteration. And then you have blue-white, which is likely built around the Wandering Emperor and March of the Otherly Worlds. I think that's what it's called. Yeah, so I think that's where you're at right now in Standard. There's basically a couple of cards that you want to be playing. And I think, like I said, I think the Naya runes, and then you have Naya runes. So you have those 3 subsets, however you want to divide them up: blue-red X, or blue-red straight, blue or blue-white, or Esper potentially, or you have black-white, or Mardu, or black-white X. You have those as one combination, and then you have the Naya runes. And Naya runes, I think, much like he says here, it sits basically at the very, very tippy top of Standard. The card generation, the repeatable threats, the consistency, the card drawing from the runes alone, which all cantrip, and Showdown of the Scalds, which just makes the deck absolutely insane. And I don't know what they could ban out of it. I don't know what could possibly be banned out of it to make a difference. I think even if Kami was banned, you'd still have a deck there. I think if any card probably deserves a ban, it's probably Showdown of the Scalds out of that deck. I think that's what gives it the legs and the longevity and the massive. It's basically every time they cast it, it's a draw 4, and then it pumps their creatures the next 2 turns. So it's absolutely absurd. But anyway, that'll do for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. And like I said, I think I agree with everything, just about everything he said here. I don't think there was anything I really disagreed with. I don't think there's 10 archetypes. I think there's maybe 5 archetypes total. And they're all basically surrounded around a specific card, except for Naya, which is basically, well, I guess it's surrounded around runes, and it uses Showdown of the Scalds the best. Anyways, hopefully you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you later.